Well, Michael Bisping has come out and said that Khabib Nurmagomedov is not the GOAT and doesn't belong in the GOAT MMA conversation. Speaking on the True Geordie podcast, Bisping said, and I quote, "Yeah, he took himself out of that," referencing himself as Khabib. And if you look, yeah, he didn't fight the best until the end of his career. When you compare that with GSP or Jones or Anderson Silva, their run against world-class competition was far longer. And then he goes on to talk about, the circumstances regarding Khabib's, pulling out due to his father passing away, making a promise to his mother. Says he respects tremendously all of that. But the quote I want to end this with is, "But for those reasons, I think when you look at the resumes, even though he was undefeated, the resumes don't really stack up." Saying that Khabib's resume doesn't stack up to GSP Jones or Anderson Silva. So, Drake. This is a hot button topic that was kind of there as Khabib retired. He got that #1 pound for pound ranking. John Jones was really pissed about it. It was a whole thing. It's been quiet for a bit, but Bisping has now come out and said he doesn't deserve to be in the GOAT conversation whatsoever because he retired too early, because he wasn't fighting the best in the world in his run-up. I mean, this is tough for me in a couple ways, but I'll let you have the floor here first. What do you think about this? What's your thoughts about Bisping saying this?
The funniest thing about it to me is, and I love Michael Bisping, I really do, one of my favorite fighters of all time, as is Khabib. But the funniest thing is he says Khabib cannot be considered now. He's out of the talk when he throws in Anderson's name, who he has notoriously slandered for his PED usage. And well, what are we doing, buddy? We're throwing him in the mix after, all that, which sure, hype, yada, yada. Maybe you could lay it onto that, but it's very silly to me. And I'm not even a person who thinks that Khabib is like the best, or I don't even know if I'd say he's top 3. I know that we've talked about this extensively, Pat, with some fellow friends. But to say that he's completely out of it is absurd. The guy's 29-0. He is one of, if not the most dominant fighter of all time. Just when you look at skill, he was practically unmatched in there, right? Only lost a handful of rounds. Maybe you could say less than a handful, half a handful, right? Is that fair to say? And yes, I do agree with the fact that him saying maybe his resume doesn't stack up to Jones or GSP, but I will throw the asterisks on Jones. I'm not even going to address him. He's not on my GOAT list. that was in another video you can go check out. GSP, though, yeah, I mean, of course not. GSP, different situations where you look at GSP enter the UFC in like his 3rd or 4th fight very early. He was practically a UFC lifer and fought real good guys off the jump. So, like, of course, you're not going to compare to that. Different times, man. But what he was able to do and how easily he made it look against essentially everybody. I know you're going to point out somebody, Pat. I'll leave that to you. But Gleason team, I love to say it. Yep. I still think he won that one. I'm in the majority there. Yeah, it's undeniable that Khabib should be in this talk. And to say that you're taking him out because he stopped too early, I feel like that should actually be praised a little bit. Like, look at all these guys who hang around. Everybody you mentioned except for GSP and Jones, who won, he did go out on top and then came back and beat you on top. And Jones, again, we shouldn't address that. Weird, murky waters. Silva lost a whole bunch in a row in MMA. Fedor, it happens to pretty much everybody except for the GSPs and the Khabibs. These guys got out and didn't want to do it anymore because they had pretty much done it all. And yes, Khabib could have defended more, really smashed it on home. But think about how, when you're nobody's being really as competitive with you as you would imagine they would have been. Like, we were so hyped for the Poirier fight, so hyped for the Gaethje fight, the Conor one, even though I don't think people really expect them to win outside the fanboys who wanted the one punch, all that kind of thing. You look at how they turned out. Khabib finished them all relatively easily. For him to go out that way and be like, well, there's no competition for him anymore. And yes, you can argue these guys, but the fact that he continued to prove it over and over and in such a dominant fashion is like, maybe he was right. Maybe he was right. And the fact that he understood that, you got to applaud him a little bit. And yes, of course, we would all love to see him continue fighting, but to say that because he did that takes him out of it completely, pretty much, is what Bisping's saying. That's just nonsense.
Yeah, no, I agree with the majority of that. What you said. I mean, there is T-Bow, right? You got Gleason T-Bow, where that's the only murky fight with Khabib that I was, and it's a little bit murky. It's been a while since I watched it, but even then, here is, and this will be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to roll with it. I would argue that Khabib has a better case for the GOAT conversation of his era than any of the other people mentioned, and here's why. Because yes, he had the T-Bow one, which is a little murky, but then, as you said, dominance throughout the rest of the fights. Lost maybe a round or round and axe in various fights. Otherwise, just pure insane dominance over people that are now, like Dustin Poirier, now going to fight for the belt again and has looked fantastic. I truly feel that, yes, he didn't fight as many people as I would have liked to see, but that dominance is massive. And to say, oh, because he retired early and he didn't fight those extra guys, well, I don't know about that. But when you look at all of the other guys mentioned by Bisping, start with Anderson Silva. You got PEDs, right? That's an issue. I love Anderson Silva. I love all the guys I'm about to talk about, but I love Anderson Silva. But yeah, I mean, that kind of looms over there, as well as coming very, very close to losing to Chael Sonnen. Like, ridiculously close. One got wrecked most of the fight and then pulled off that submission. Didn't look the best. Jones. Most everyone thinks that Dominic Reyes beat John Jones. Let's just be honest. I certainly do. I don't know what those judges in Texas were doing, and I live in Texas, so I know the judges are as wild as everyone else down here, so I'm not surprised. but yeah, I mean, Reyes beat Jones, and there's even I can see the case for Santos being Jones before that. GSP, let's not forget when GSP
forgot Gustafsson too.
Yeah, oh yeah, and Gustafsson. GSP, let's not forget when GSP first retired, everyone thought he lost to Hendricks. Everyone in the world thought he lost to Johnny Hendricks. Dana White was like, I don't know what these judges were talking about. Johnny Hendricks clearly won the fight. So to say that, oh, he didn't fight enough guys, when everyone that Bisping mentioned had essentially had these glaring kind of like, I don't know about, or it's PEDs from Jones and Silva, or controversial decisions from GSP and Jones, that says a lot. Because yes, GSP came back, but he came back fighting Michael Bisping. And I like Michael Bisping, but let's, not exactly.
Not Bobby Knuckles.
Not Bobby Knuckles, not Yoel Romero. Let's think about that for a bit. So I would argue that in a way, Khabib has a stronger argument for GOAT status than those guys. Would I put him as the GOAT above those guys? It'd be, I don't know. It'd have to be a longer conversation. Depends on the criteria. GSPI is kind of always up there for me, despite the Hendricks debacle. So I mean, it's kind of, we'll see. But I hate this reasoning. I absolutely hate this reasoning because Khabib is probably the first person that I've seen in combat sports who truly walked away when he was on top. GSP didn't walk away when he was on top. Right. GSP walked away after a ridiculously controversial decision and then came back, beat Bisping, and then walked away. Jones, again, left light heavyweight, moving on up after controversial decisions. Silva, he had the PEDs, he had his downfall with Weidman and all that. Khabib's the only one where I'm pretty sure if he were to come back today, I'd still favor him over most everybody else in the division, who truly looked incredibly dominant throughout that entire period up to and once he got his champion run. Take the T-Bow, whatever decision aside, take that out. Beyond,
and that was even so long ago too.
That was so long ago, right? And that's the thing. I'm pretty sure that was debut in the UFC or fight?
No, that was like his third fight. Belarus was his first one.
Yeah, second or third fight, right? Which that happens, right? And then like Silva had losses before he made his run.
Yeah.
So to say that, oh well, he hasn't fought enough guys is absolute BS. It's like trying to say that Michael Bisping really was a defending champion, right? When we all know that fighting 44-year-old Dan Henderson who was 2-6 at the time. Well, I don't know about that.
It happened, Pat. It was the thing. But
he almost lost. He almost lost.
Wow.
Well, we'll go back.
Yikes. I know it's just crazy. I've never heard this argument against Khabib before, which coming from Michael is very surprising. It is weird to me. But yeah, when you do look at his career, and you mentioned like the fact that let's go from now to the Tebow fight. We'll just look at that stretch, right? The only round I can remember him actually losing, was Conor McGregor round 3. And it wasn't even like he got washed in that one. That was not a dominant round for Conor. It was just competitive. He edged him out in the striking. That was pretty much entirely on the feet that round. That's it.
And that was the same round where he went back to his corner and they were like, hey, stop striking. Like, go back to wrestling. What are you doing? And that was Khabib messing around. Right. Is what that was. Right. That's important to point out, is that wasn't like, oh, like Conor legitimately defended the takedowns and like kept it on the feet, and it was like, oh, he edged him out. That was Khabib deciding he wanted to box for a round and then getting like chastised and be like, okay, I'm gonna go back and finish this. That's what that was.
Yeah, so that's telling in its own right. That he was like, can do that against a guy who is such a feared striker, and that was his only way to win. And Khabib survived, hung in there just fine. It was a competitive round, but edged it to Conor. I don't think there's any debating that. So when that's your only really point of contention, and of course, it might as well bring it up, Pat, but Joe Rogan absolutely ruined the hindsight of the Michael Johnson fight. He was in no trouble whatsoever. I still am infuriated by the narrative that was created from that. Totally fine. No issues there. Went on to absolutely murder poor Michael Johnson.
Even if you go back and watch that fight, though, even if you counted that as like a hard strike or a wobble, right? Like almost a knockdown, Khabib still wins the round.
Yes. I mean, yes, very much so. Yeah. So it was just an unprecedented kind of level of dominance, numerous 10-8s. You could almost guarantee a 10-8 every single fight, at least one in one round. And he pretty much did that. I can't think of, too many times it's like, oh, these are close Khabib rounds outside of, the ones that he arguably lost. Right. So you cannot say that very often, especially in a sport like this. I was gonna say combat sports overall, really. So come on.
Yeah. And well, I actually think didn't Ally Quinto win around against Khabib at one point too?
Not on my cards.
I thought it was close, but again, I thought
that was also a poor narrative from Joe.
It was also, he got chastised again because that was when Khabib was not trying to wrestle as much.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if he's not your GOAT, that's fine. I think there are plenty of arguments against it, and there are enough other dominant fighters that you can talk about, them being GOATs over Khabib. I have no problem. If you've got a legitimate argument or reason or criteria, sure, we'll go with that. But to not have him involved in the conversation because he didn't fight enough people, when the dominance he displayed against Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Rafael dos Anjos, who went on to become lightweight champion after Khabib wrecked him. Conor McGregor, former lightweight champion who was on fire for the longest time, just untouchable. I don't know how you can't include Khabib in the conversation. Because yes, he had one fight against Tebow early on in his UFC career that is a little iffy-ish. But even then, I mean, I don't know how you can't say this wasn't one of the greatest fighters to grace the octagon. I can't understand it.
Yeah. Well, Thankfully, I guess we don't have to, Pat, because it's just Michael Bisping. It's just him.
It's just him. It's just him. All right, let us know in the comments how you feel about Bisping's comments, how you feel about Khabib being in the GOAT conversation or not. Is he your GOAT, or is he at least in the conversation? If he's not, let us know why. Would love to hear more arguments on this. We're always open to discussion around here. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, bell notifications so you know when we're dropping new videos. And with that, yeah, I mean, MMA GOATs, man, it'll never end. You'll never have one true GOAT. So,
Bah.
Yep.
Yep.